Are you considering partnering with another business but are worried about the risks? Are you considering using a joint venture agreement to protect yourself because that's how you're structuring your collaboration with your business partner? Joint ventures can be fantastic, but they need proper legal structure. I'm Malcolm Zoppi, an English qualified solicitor, and in this video, we'll discuss joint ventures and joint venture agreements. We'll go over three main things. First, what is a joint venture agreement? Second, what are the different legal forms that a joint venture can take? And lastly, what are the key benefits of joint ventures? Fantastic, let's get started. So, chapter 1 is, what is a joint venture agreement? A joint venture agreement is your legal safety net. Is the document that governs everything between the joint venture partners and the joint venture entity itself. This agreement typically details the rights and obligations of each of the joint venture partners, and additionally, it also describes the decision-making processes that need to be followed and the mechanism by which disputes can be resolved. Think of it as your constitutional document for the joint venture. From my experience, comprehensive agreements prevent disputes before they happen. So the more clear and detailed the document is, typically the better. As a pro tip, if you're structuring your joint venture via the creation of a new limited company, make sure that you check the company's articles of association against your draft joint venture agreement to make sure that there are no conflicts. If there are conflicts, then you might need, for example, to amend your company's articles of association. Fantastic. Let's move on to chapter 2. What legal forms can a joint venture typically take? So you've got a few options, but typically the most common structure that a joint venture takes is the limited liability company, the LTD. If you're opting for an LTD, the limited liability company, then the partners of the joint venture are going to be shareholders of that limited company, but typically would also act as directors of the company. The key benefit of using a limited liability company is that it's quite flexible. You can have different amounts of shares per partner, different classes of shares if required. And also, it limits the partner's liability because the company is a limited company, and therefore the liability is capped at how much money the partner has contributed to the LTD. Another form is the limited liability partnership. That's where all the partners are limited liability partners, and typically it is used when it is less complex and people just want to join forces and carry on a business together. For example, when accountants or solicitors come together, they want to join into a practice but still have their separation. The last main option available is when you just have a contract. So it's a purely contractual relationship. The parties enter into the contract as themselves, whether that's as individuals or as their separate limited companies, and the only document or vehicle between them is that contract. The main advantage of having a purely contractual relationship is that typically the costs are lower. You just need to put in place a contract, and also the running costs and the burdens of running the joint venture are typically lower because there's less admin to comply with. On the other hand, the main drawback or disadvantage is that typically the liability is greater because the liability of the partners sits with the partners themselves. So their whole limited company or themselves as the individuals who entered into the joint venture agreement are at risk. If instead you're using something like a limited liability company and they enter into that contract by simply having shares in the LTD that's acting as the vehicle, then the liability is lower. Now, before we discuss the main benefits of joint ventures, feel free to email me if looking for professional legal advice. With our legal advice calls, there are no charges, no obligations, and no nonsense. Contact me now at info@zoppi.co.uk. Fantastic. Let's move on to chapter 3, which is the benefits of a joint venture. So there are a few key advantages of entering into a joint venture. First, you minimize your risks. So if you're splitting risk between multiple partners, then the risk again is split across these. You're not taking the whole risk just yourself. Of course, as a consequence, the rewards are also split. Secondly, you might be able to take on bigger projects that need more capital than you have by joining and pooling resources with other partners. As a result, the rewards that come from greater projects, the ROI, might be greater even as a percentage. Third, you might be able to gain access to markets, niche markets, that might be harder to enter if you're not already part of that market. If you do a joint venture with someone who's already part of a market, then you tap into their resources, maybe their goodwill and their reputation, and are able to access that new market. And lastly, you might be complementing each other's skills. So you might partner with someone who has different skills to yourself. And of course, you will bring skills that they don't have. And that way, when you join forces, you are a more well-rounded company. So that's really my top tip when it comes to choosing your business partner for that joint venture. Make sure to not choose whoever is similar to you or shares the same views as you, because it might be that you're just bringing the same skills to the partnership. Keep an open mind as to who you should partner with, because important is to get someone who has something that you do not have, whether that's money or knowledge. So that's how joint venture agreements and joint ventures work and can benefit you and your business. If you want to learn more about how to structure a joint venture agreement or other constitutional documents, this next video right here should be very useful because it talks about how to structure a shareholders agreement. Thank you for watching.